Okay.
Okay, do we have Rick Bennett in front of you? My share screen.
Not yet.
Not yet.
The screen is, sorry.
Now it is.
Okay, there we got him. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, brothers and sisters. It is a pleasure to welcome you in this Thanksgiving season to share again in the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. Our guest and presenter this evening is Rick Bennett, who is the host and creator of the Gospel Tangents podcast. And there he interviews scholars in the fields of Mormon history and science and theology, and as tangents and indicates all kinds of angles. He has hosted a remarkably broad range of perspectives with people like Locke McCabe, with whom you were just talking about, and Santa Connor, and while our forum focuses on the Book of Mormon, Rick has hosted constructive and balanced, interesting discussions with diverse people from a broad range of Latter-day Saint topics. We're looking this evening to provide a tour of Independence, Missouri, which was, of course, the goal of 4 missionaries who were carrying the Book of Mormon there in 1831. Let us pray. Great guide who creates and sponsors a tour through all of existence. We thank you for your patience with us, your forgiving grace, your whispers, nudges, and enduring persistence. For in the walk with you, brief as it is, we get distracted and are inclined to turn our back until we realize how much we need you in the face of our insecurity, our foolishness, our need for protection from perceived outside attack. Our world at war in Tigray, in politics, in Ukraine, needs your peace, your guidance, forbearance, your grace. For we see that war and senseless violence is but our refrain, and peace exudes from you. Love radiates from your face. And as we walk with you through the turmoil of our strife, we recognize and appreciate the blessing of your promise that with you, we can share eternal life. This evening, we ask your blessing on our friend and brother, Rick Bennett, as he serves as guide upon this Independence tour, that we embrace again the messages of life from our walk with you, the Word, the ultimate guide whose promises will surely endure, whose fingerprints are found on us, on every aspect of existence, and whose breath and blessing on our tour of life encourages us to virtuous persistence. In the name of Jesus, our guide for eternity, we pray. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick is one of those people who not only conducts the tours, but he goes to the places where people are. He came to Nauvoo this last summer to check us out on the Times of the Seasons site, and I really appreciate the fact that he's one of those people who's willing to get his hands dirty. So let us welcome the Gospel Tangents moderator back, Rick Bennett. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Paul. And if you guys haven't been to Nauvoo, you really need to go see, because I understand, Paul, you're probably going to be back there again next year to more on the dig.
Yes, if you look at the webpage, idignauvoo.com, that will be putting our schedule up. We are going to have some people from Western Illinois University with us, it looks like this time. So we're adjusting the schedule. I'm not sure that we got it firm yet, but typically from the middle of May until about June 27 is when we commonly terminate, because that's the celebration of the assassination of Joseph and Hiram.
Well, very cool. I will just say, if you can go check out Paul and help him out with his dig, it's so much fun, and you know, I mean, if you're here, you got to be a church history geek like me. So you'll love it. So, all right. Well, I'm going to try to share my screen here, and we're going to hopefully talk about the first Book of Mormon mission. One of the interesting things is when the missionaries came through Kirtland, they were on their way to Missouri. They had a few converts in Kirtland, but they didn't give very many copies of the Book of Mormon out to the local residents because they were trying to go to Missouri, because Missouri was supposed to be the New Jerusalem. And so this really was even though there were some missionaries in Kirtland, and then Kirtland kind of became its own little center of the restoration. The goal always was Missouri. So this past fall in September, for the John Whitmer Historical Associations, I went to the Temple Lot Church, and they gave me this pamphlet. I've kind of cut it up into pieces, and we're going to kind of go through it. You can see at the bottom here, there's a map. And we're going to start at the Temple Lot Church, and then we're going to visit all these places that deal with the restoration, including Governor Boggs' homes, I guess I should say. And so it was surprising because I think it took about an hour and a half to do this. Although me and my friend Matthew Turner, if I can get my slide to advance here, there he is. There's Matthew Turner. He was kind of my my buddy as we went through this. He's a good friend that lives there in Kansas, and also a Mormon history geek as well. So one of the things about this tour is you're basically looking all over for these little plaques in the sidewalk, and so Matthew is standing basically at his feet. You can see this plaque here, where Joseph Smith and other Mormon leaders dedicated the temple lot. So on the white building here on the top right, you can see is the Temple Lot Church across the street from the Community of Christ Temple. And of course, just on the left side of Matt's head here, you can see the Stone Church, which was the first RLDS church that was actually, I think, if I remember right, I think it was the first church in Missouri, and that was overseen by Joseph Smith III, which we could almost just do a presentation on that building because it's such a beautiful building inside. But my focus here today is to kind of hit these 14 stops. That it's a nice little walking tour, and even in September, you know, Missouri can get pretty hot. And I remember Matthew, I was like, why are you wearing a long sleeve shirt? And he's, you know, a good person, trying not to get skin cancer. So he was dressed well. So even though it was pretty warm, but anyway, so the temple lot, of course, you know, that's where the church was going to try to build the first of 24 temples. And in the 1930s, you can see here, this is a picture on the right. They actually broke ground and dug out this hill, and you can see some of the footings they put in there to try to put in the temple. And so this is the ground that was dedicated by Joseph Smith on August 13, 1831. The church had purchased it from Jonas Flournoy, and we'll talk about him in just a moment. And so this was really the first gathering place for the church. And I'm just going to call it church because at this point, there's no RLDS church, there's no LDS church. It was actually the Church of Christ back in 1831. And so we were all together in one big happy family. But this nice black and white photo here on the right I think is really cool. I love the tractor. You can see. So this was built, they started building this just before the Depression hit. And then, of course, the Great Depression hit and they couldn't finish it. And so it sat just as an ugly hole for well, probably a couple of decades. President Harry Truman is from Independence. You can kind of see that on the left side with this little green photograph, you can kind of see the hill there. The city of Independence offered to fill in the hole because the Temple Lot Church just didn't have the money to fill it in, and they didn't want Harry Truman when he came home from being president of the United States to come home and see this ugly eyesore because it looked terrible, and so the city offered to fill in the hole, and that's what we have now. So during the excavation, they found these two stones here, Southeast Corner Temple. I think that's what SECT stands for, in 1831. And these were two of the original store. And then it looks like a backwards 4, which is a mark for surveyors or something like that. And so they've got little markers in that grass lot that you can see there. I love this picture on the right where people are standing in the where the foundation would have been for the church temple, and you can see that it's right next to the church there. So this is a cool photograph courtesy of the Temple Lot Church. So that's pretty cool. Now the next picture here, this when the Saints came to Independence, the land was owned by Jacob Flournoy, and this was his actual home. And and it's funny because it's both Jacob and Jones. I've heard both. I probably should have put Jones on there. Jones Flournoy lived in this small brick house. This actually has been moved. It's not far from the original location. We'll find out where the original location is now. But this is a Community of Christ historic site there. It's literally across the street from the Temple Lot Church. And so this was Jones Flournoy had just purchased this probably a week before the Saints came, and then he ended up selling it to the Saints. Made a small profit, not a big profit at all, but so this was the what's known as the Flournoy house. I think my shed is bigger than this house. It's just a tiny house. But this was Frontier, Missouri back then. And so Bishop Edward Partridge purchased this on the behalf of the church, and the 63 acres, which includes land where both the Community of Christ Temple is and the LDS Visitor Center. So the Temple Lot Church just has a small portion of the Temple Lot, but the Community of Christ and the LDS Church own other portions of the Temple Lot. So it's actually really huge. Originally, Joseph had planned on 24 temples in Independence, and actually he planned that for Kirtland as well. And so, but they never even got the original one built, and they've made a couple of attempts now. But anyway, so this was the man that they purchased the land from and it's directly across the street from the Temple Lot. Next photo, you can see kind of behind the tree here is the Community of Christ Temple. And so this is stop number 3, the Partridge Homesite and School. Bishop Edward Partridge, his home was right here, right behind that bench basically. And of course, Bishop Partridge was tarred and feathered in the public square. We're going to visit that here shortly. And there was also a brick schoolhouse, and it was used as a meeting house in unpleasant weather. So this is also the place where Mormons surrendered their weapons to the Missouri militia in November of 1833 during those those hostilities there. So that's literally basically just on the temple grounds there in Independence. Stop number 4. Unfortunately, I didn't take a picture of this on my trip, and so this is a Google Maps photo. But this is the original location of the Flournoy home, and you can see the Community of Christ Temple there in the background, and it's just kind of an open area there now. So I talked to Matthew, and I'm like, "Do you have a picture of this?" And he didn't take any pictures either, so I had to go to Google Maps and take this photo. That's why there's snow on the ground. But this was the original location of the Jones Flournoy home, and it was constructed in 1826. So moving on, you'll find that a lot of these places are, like here's a picture of a fence, basically. This is the Rathbun lot 43. And this was one of the blacksmith shops that was broken into in July 20th, 1833. The Rathbuns were eventually forced to leave the county. You can see a picture of Matthew, and then of course right at his feet are the plaque there. So there's just kind of another business here. So that's stop number 5. The public square, we mentioned this earlier. This is where Bishop Edward Partridge and Charles Allen were tarred and feathered right here on July 20th, 1833. It's funny because it's now the Jackson County Courthouse, and so it also has some other significance not related to Mormonism. But yeah, this was the public square. There were escalating tensions between the Mormons and Missouri settlers. Sidney Rigdon's preached here from the courthouse steps in 1832, and so the Mormon leaders were arrested and subsequently appeared in the courtroom here. And the funny thing is, it's a courtroom now. So I think I have some more pictures. Oh, I didn't put the pictures in. But yeah, it's a big courthouse now, and so it kind of has continued on with that function. With Harry Truman coming from Independence, Missouri, a lot of these sites have significance both to Mormons, but as well as Harry Truman. And so I thought I'd put in more pictures there, but I guess I didn't. Stop number 7 is the Gilbert and Whitney store that has been basically restored. You can kind of see what it looked like, or what they think it looked like. Kind of artist rendering there, and what it looks like now. My friend Matthew's sitting there. And so this was the site of the Gilbert and Whitney store. It was purchased in November 1832 by Sidney Gilbert. And in 1833, 500 men gathered to demolish the establishment. So now it's a nice brick building. So it's nice. This is one of the few places, and you can see they didn't really restore it to the original. The funny thing is, we went on a Monday, almost everything was closed. I was surprised on a Monday. But this was the site for the Gilbert and Whitney store. And so it's kind of nice that they've kind of revived that place and given it the same name that it was in the 1830s. Moving on, we have a printing office, and the funniest thing is, I think there's some printing that actually does go on here. Obviously, the original building has been torn down, but this was the first paper published in Independence, Missouri. It was called the Evening and Morning Star. W.W. Phelps was the printer, and his family resided here. And this was one of the big things here was where this was where W.W. Phelps had printed an article called Free People of Color. And that was kind of the last straw between the Missourians and the Mormons, was the fact that the paper welcomed blacks to come to the town, but free blacks. But of course, at the time, Missouri was a slave state, and so the local Missouri settlers thought they were inviting free blacks to town, and they did not like that. As a result, the mobs broke in and pied the type, basically scattered the type there. Also, the Book of Commandments were being published, and those were strewn all over. It was Helen Mar Whitney. She was just a young girl of about 12 years old at the time. She helped kind of gather up some of the original Book of Commandments, and so we're kind of lucky to have anything left, because it was being printed, and any copies we have were gathered by those girls. Oh, Mary Elizabeth and Carolyn, Sidney Gilbert's nieces. I know Helen Mar Kimball was another one. That they risked their lives to gather up the original, the precursor to the Doctrine and Covenants, the Book of Commandments. And so there's there's so few copies. If you can get a Book of Commandments, it's worth way more than first edition copies of the Book of Mormon. So so this was the site of quite a riot back then, and it's not far from the public square and courthouse where we just were, and leaders were charged there. So the building was repaired and occupied until about 1930. Of course, this is a new building here now. So this was the printing office where the Book of Commandments came from. Log Courthouse. This one's kind of a dual site in the fact that not only does it have Mormon significance, but it's got Harry Truman significance. So this was the first Jackson County courthouse. It was built in 1827 by slave labor. The county built the new brick courthouse on the public square in 1830. So Sidney Gilbert purchased the building and vacated the building for $371. It's amazing how prices have changed. So it was the home of the Gilbert family, and including Mary Elizabeth Rollins. Oh, she was one of the girls. I think I called her Leitner, but her maiden name was Rollins. But she was also one of the girls that helped gather up the Book of Commandments, I believe. So in November of 1832, Sidney Gilbert relocated the church store to the lot 51, but his family continued to reside in the former log courthouse, and it was moved here in 1916 for preservation purposes. The other interesting thing about it is not only was it the first log courthouse in Independence, but it also served functions for Judge and future President Harry S. Truman. And so President Truman, when he was a judge, used this building as well. So I thought that was pretty interesting, that it has ties to both early Mormonism and President Truman. Governor Boggs, probably one of the most infamous people in Mormon history. You can see where Matthew is standing there. That's basically where I believe it was his first house. And this was when he was actually nice to the Mormons. So Boggs furnished some space for the Whitmers, and Alexander Donovan, a Clay County lawyer, said Peter Whitmer was a tailor, and I employed him to make him a suit of clothes. So this was interesting that that Boggs let Peter Whitmer there and used that as a tailor shop. But as you can see, it's basically a parking lot now. So so that's kind of funny. The Noland House is lot number 10. It was a popular inn. It was located on the corner of Main and Maple. So in 1838, Joseph Smith and Mormon leaders were held here under house arrest while awaiting trial. They were occasionally they let prisoners walk around town, and they visited the temple lot. And Parley Pratt wrote that when he saw it last, it was a noble forest, but our enemies had robbed it of every single vestige of timber, and it now lay desolate or clothed with grass and weeds. So it's now, once again, this is another one of those dual sites where not only does it bear significance for Joseph Smith and other leaders that were held there, but it's also the Clinton's drugstore was also a site that Harry Truman visited frequently. So it's kind of fun that some of these sites have dual roles in Mormonism as well as with President Harry Truman. So this is the jail / firehouse museum. You can see it looks like a firehouse with the big doors there. It's now a museum by the National Park Service, but this was the original location of a jail that later became a firehouse, and now it's a museum. And so it's right just kitty corner across from the Noland House that we were just looking at. So it wasn't far to go from the house arrest to the jail there. So this is the plaque for that firehouse. It was the 1827 county jail, and you can see this little cabin basically that it had an outside stairway, and an upper room was the only way to enter the structure. Prominent Mormons Sidney Gilbert, William McClellan, John Corral, Isaac Morley were all jailed in the lower dungeon. If you've seen the Liberty Jail, these are very similar looking structures, and so it basically served as a dungeon in November of 1833 when Mormon leaders were jailed there. A decade later, Orrin Porter Rockwell was held in the second jail built on the site, and it's the present building of the fire station where it serves as the Truman Home ticket office, as we saw on the last slide. Church leaders were arrested following a battle between Christian Whitmer's cornfield in the Kaw Township, and so that's basically where they were jailed. So kind of interesting to see how it looked then and how it looks now. It's obviously quite different, but anyway, so that's kind of fun. There's also, I should mention, these plaques were put in by the Missouri Mormon Frontier Association, MMFF. And so it's nice because there were some other places outside of Independence, and this organization has tried to put plaques where key events in Mormon history took place. So we can be grateful to them because they're not, I don't think they're associated with either the LDS Church or the Community of Christ. And so it's nice that they've gotten together and put these places together so you know exactly where some of these key events happened. And then we're going to conclude our tour with the Boggs home. I confess that it made me happy to know that the Boggs home was torn down. It's just kind of an empty field or empty hill here now. But so we're looking, you can see there where the plaque is, but that's what they think it looked like. Of course, Governor Boggs issued the 1838 extermination order. And I didn't realize, of course, when he was governor, how deep his roots were to independence. And so, and this is also the house where Porter Rockwell was accused of the assassination attempt of Governor Boggs. And so with the extermination order, over 5,000 Mormons from the state were expelled from the state of Missouri. And, I have to say, we went to a restaurant. I'm trying to remember where that was. And they had a mural of a lot of Mormon events. And I thought, I wonder how many people who grew up in Independence, I mean, they have to be familiar with the Mormon past, but if they understand how deeply Mormon this city was. So anyway, I definitely went through that tour a lot faster than it took me and Matthew. But I thought, many of us don't live in Independence, and so I thought it would be fun to kind of give a little tour of Independence and see where some of these key Mormon sites were. And like I said, it was the first real mission where they brought the Book of Mormon. They couldn't even spare any in Kirtland for the converts there. They brought the Book of Mormon here to Independence, and so anyway, that kind of concludes my presentation. So I guess I will stop sharing here, and I'll open it up for any questions that you guys may have.
Well, again, I get to commonly claim that first question. Help us understand, if you would please, their success in distributing Book of Mormons once they got to independence.
Well, it's kind of funny because it seems like they had more success with bringing in converts than actually converting the locals. Joseph Smith had the revelation that this was the place to be the New Jerusalem, and coming from the north, where slavery definitely wasn't as popular, there was a real culture clash, and a lot of the southern settlers, were more from Kentucky, and Missouri became a slave state. And so I don't know, even though that was Joseph Smith's purpose, was to convert the Indians and the Gentiles, I don't know that they had a lot of success. It seemed like the more success was just funneling people to Missouri. And because there were so many immigrants to the area, that also is why so quickly the hostilities broke out, because the Missourians knew, if these Mormons keep funneling in here, they're going to take over the county government, and we don't want that. So I can't say that the missionary work was super successful. Excuse me. There, even though that was the original plan, of course, they all assumed they were going to be very successful, but they were more successful at bringing in immigrants than they were at actually converting people.
If I may add to that, the First Nations people that were in Kansas were the target, but the Mormons shortly discovered that they couldn't proselytize among the First Nations people in Kansas without having a special permit from the agent, and that was William Clark in St. Louis. And so they had to send one of their 4 members back to St. Louis to try to get that permission, and it was denied. And so they were not allowed to, they had some initial contacts and initial positive reception, but the effort to bring the book to the First Nations people really did not succeed.
I think you were the one that told me that in Nauvoo last time, so I appreciate you adding that. That's great insight there.
Because while you're talking about 1848, 38, when the Mormons were kicked out, Governor Boggs' extermination order of October of 1838 came just 3 days before the massacre or incident in the Mormon War at Hans Mill, where 17 were killed and buried in a well. That same time, there were 800 Potawatomis who had been burned out of their village in Indiana, who were marched across Missouri, and they had lost about 100 people out of the 800 in the village in the march across Missouri. And at the end of October, when they were approaching independence, is when the incident at Hans Mill occurred, and they would have been approaching independence at about that time, preparing to cross into Kansas, where Kansas named a county for them. And there is still a small cemetery in downtown Kansas City, Kansas, with Potawatomi burials. But the Potawatomi got a very, very poor treatment across the state of Missouri. At the same time, the Mormons were being expelled. Interesting parallel in history that I think we don't often appreciate.
Yeah, the Missourians didn't like any outsiders, period. There's another story, I believe Gene Adams tells, where, during the auction, which I think occurred right before the Mormons got to town, where Jones Flournoy purchased the land. There was a judge that the mobs basically came to the judge and said, if you interfere with this auction in any way, we, the mob, will throw you, the judge, in jail. So it was an extremely lawless area, and the mobs were more in control of the town than the government. So
yeah. Well, let me add one more point. You pointed out that the Missouri Mormon Frontier Foundation was responsible for the plaques, and that foundation was presided over by Ron Romig for a number of years, and it was a sponsoring organization when I was doing archaeology at the Charles C. Rich House in Caldwell County, then also in Hans Mill, and both of those documents are currently being considered by editors of John Whitmer for publication. So Missouri Mormon Foundation is not sectarian. It had quite a number of people who just simply were interested in Missouri history, but then it also had quite a number of Mormons and Community of Christ people as well. But it was a very interesting group of people, just like this group of people, very interested in history and archaeology. And so they did put together some good work.
yeah, and I will just put in a plug. I know Ron was at the he gave some amazing tours to Far West and some of the other places in Missouri. I need to get Ron on my podcast. I was surprised that he remembered who I was. I'd met him before, but he's like, yeah, I know who you are. But he's an amazing historian and just a great person. So I will also just say, I believe I want to say 3-4 years, the John Whitmer Historical Association has to be in Independence. And so if you guys can ever go to Whitmer when it's in Independence, I call it Mormon Disneyland, but I'm a little weird, but it's fun. The Harry Truman Museum, I didn't get to go this time, but I went the last time I was in, I think Mormon history was in Independence about 10 years ago. And that's just fun. And Whitmer is just amazing. So encourage you all to go. It's a lot of fun.
Let me cite one more convergence between Harry Truman and the Mormons. When he announced the United States would be helping to form the United Nations, it was from the RLDS Temple auditorium steps. And so looking across the same view that you were showing of the temple ground there. And of course, that was shortly after the hole had been filled by the city of Independence.
Yeah, that I think wasn't his reception after he returned, was it in the auditorium? I believe it was.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
In the auditorium, then that he announced that the United States would be a part of that organization.
Yeah.
Okay, were you finished, Paul?
I'm sorry, I got my fair share. I'll back off.
Okay,
Thanks, Paul.
that's fine. Earl, I know your hand had been up. Did you not want to ask your question?
Well, Paul is a better historian for that area, but that is the home of Jesse James too. Very few people mention that.
Oh,
The
yeah,
Rock
I
family.
saw a sign for that. Yeah.
He would go up into the north and steal money and stuff and bring it down to finance the Southern War in Missouri. The jailhouse, no, the Hedrikite, the Temple lot church burned down too,
Twice.
and our church helped them rebuild it.
The LDS church.
Our LDS.
Oh, I think the LDS church also helped. That's interesting.
Yep. It's enough.
Yeah, just to mention that the Temple Lot Church, it was burned down twice by arson. I think the first time was in about 1910, if I remember right, and then the second time was in 1990, and both of them by disgruntled former members. And so, I have lots of pictures of that, but I wanted to focus on Independence. But yeah, it's just really sad. They've been through a lot, that group.
Okay, David and Jan, you have a question, David?
Yes, thank you. I don't have a question. I have a comment for Rick. Really appreciate the presentation, Rick. In my studies, I've learned that Missouri became a state in 1821, and the legislature immediately passed a law that free blacks could not immigrate into the state of Missouri. And that was done so that if they're the black in Missouri, they were either a slave or an escaped slave. And then the church came in 1831. You see, immediately that document you mentioned, the church's position on blacks, put them directly opposed to even the law of Missouri.
See, I wasn't aware of that. That's really interesting. Wow. So no wonder, because I always thought they were overreacting to that. So I didn't realize there was a law in 1821. Thank you, David. That makes more sense why they were so upset.
Okay, thank you, David. James Lucas, you're up. There you are.
Mute. Okay, a couple of points, Rick. It's been a long time since I was in Independence, but I think it would be a fascinating history to do a tour of, because there's still other layers of sort of subjects of interest that are associated with Independence. One is that my understanding is that there were two fairly significant battles of the Civil War fought in Independence. There was a first battle of Independence and then a second battle of Independence. And I understand that there are historical markers for sites that are relevant to those two battles, which adds yet again another layer of interesting American history to Independence. And in addition to the early LDS or early Mormon and the Harry Truman aspects to it. And then another piece of Independence tour that I think would be fascinating would be all the current restoration churches that have locations and facilities in Independence. Did you take a walking tour around to the LDS and Community of Christ and then all the various Restoration Branch and Remnant Church and so forth, groups that have their headquarters there? I mean, I think that would be a fascinating tour as well.
It is. I didn't do that on this past trip, but I mean, the LDS Visitor Center is, of course, across the street from the temple. The Whitmer meetings were at the temple. And me and Steve Pineacre, we went to the Temple Lot Church. That's where we picked up that pamphlet. And then the Remnant Church, every time I go, I swear there's remodeling going on there. I swear, can't get. I've been in there before, but it was about 10 or 15 years ago. The Cutlerite Church, I talked with Virginia. That's not far from the temple. I've met what was it called? I'm trying to remember. Living Hope Church of Jesus Christ. I don't remember. There's you can't go anywhere in Independence without seeing some variation of the Church of Christ, or the Church of Jesus Christ, or the Latter-day Saints, or the Restored, or the Remnant, or like everywhere. They're just everywhere. So I've called it Mormon Disneyland, and my friends think I'm a little nuts, but
No, you have,
it's fun.
so that's a modern aspect of touring about. That would just be interesting to go see and learn about all those different restoration churches.
Yeah, the Cutlerites are pretty. I remember the last time I was there, I asked them if I could interview them, and she said no, because there's only about 9 of them left, and about 6 of them are in their 60s or their 80s. I know that there's one that's in his 30s. He's probably the youngest member, and I believe he lives in Colorado.
In your walking about, did you see markers for the battles of independence from the Civil War? I haven't been there to look for them since I became aware of that, but I've seen information that indicates that they got markers all over for the various areas that were involved in those battles.
Yeah, I believe there was something close to the fire station, or which is now the Harry Truman Museum or whatever. But that wasn't my focus. Sometimes I get too focused on Mormon history, but yeah.
No, but you put all that together and you definitely do have Disneyland. Appealing to a wide range of interests.
Yeah, you don't get sick from getting spun around. There was a Masonic hall. I probably should have mentioned that in my presentation. That one empty lot where the Flournoy home with the snow, where the Flournoy home originally was, on the right hand side was a Masonic hall, which I thought was kind of interesting. Of course, Masonry wasn't as big of a deal as in the Nauvoo period, but I thought it was interesting there was a Masonic hall right there.
Okay. Anyway, those are my comments.
Okay, thank you, James. Wanda, go ahead, please.
My comment doesn't have much to do with the Book of Mormon, but I noticed that Flournoy house had 2 front doors.
Yeah, I don't know why. I've never been inside.
It's interesting to me because my dad was born in a house like that. And I didn't really figure it out until lately why his mother, who was checking on him, he was born on November 11th, 1903.
Oh, wow.
And he got the measles, and his mother went to check on him, and she caught pneumonia and died when he was not quite 3 years old.
Oh, that's terrible.
But I wondered why. And when I saw that the homes in Kentucky were built like that, it was because of the heating. Every room had a chimney, and they kept the walls between so you couldn't go through from one to the other. And you had to go outside. And so she went out in the cold and got pneumonia. So that was really interesting to me. And it was so small, it must have only had 2 rooms.
Right, yeah. Yeah, those are so small. Like I think my shed is bigger than that house.
I'm finished.
Okay, thanks, Wanda. Paul, you got more questions?
Yes, but I see Bill has his hand up. Shepherd.
His physical
I
hand.
missed that. Sorry, missed that. Go ahead, Bill Shepherd. You have to unmute, please.
I think I would find it interesting if you could give a chronology from the first arrival of the Mormon missionaries until, say, the death of Joseph Smith, just something for continuity of the period.
For the Missouri period? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, during the lifetime of Joseph Smith.
Wow, you're testing me on that one. So the first mission, I think they settled in 1830, 1831. Joseph dedicated the temple site there, and then he went back to Kirtland. It's always funny to me why Joseph came and dedicated it, and then it's almost like they had two headquarters. And unlike today, where we've got telephones and fax machines and email, like I would think having two headquarters would be hard anyway. And then if you're doing everything by letter, and so when they had all the problems in Missouri with especially 1833 was really kind of the powder keg where the Saints were kicked out, and so they moved to Caldwell County, Clay County, Ray County, and so basically 1833, the Saints were kicked out of Jackson County and spread to some other counties. Caldwell County was created by Alexander Doniphan. He was a state legislator at the time, big friend of the Mormons, and so he helped create Caldwell County, but it was about half the size that the Mormons originally wanted, and so that's why they kept spilling into other counties, Ray and Davies and Clay. Trying to remember what the other counties were. DeWitt, I think, as well. And so I know Alex Baugh, professor at BYU, has said that Caldwell County was kind of like, he called it the Mormon reservation. Like the Missourians were like, look, we created this special county for you. You have to stay in Clay County. And so the problem was, I believe it was 1836, 1837. There was the election day battle at Gallatin. And so one of the Missouri politicians were always trying to court the Mormon vote because Mormons had I think, bad, and still do, have a bad habit of block voting. And so Pennington, he was the once he learned that the Mormons weren't going to vote for him, he was like, hey, well, you're supposed to be in Caldwell County, you shouldn't be in Ray County and DeWitt and all these other counties. And so he made a big stink about that, because before, as long as the Mormons stayed in Caldwell, nobody cared what they did. But when they started spilling over, and if they were voting for the other guy, the Whig candidate, because it was between the Whigs and the Democrats, if they weren't voting for the right guy, then they would stir up the people and do that. So 1837 is, or let's see, that's when the Kirtland banking crisis happened. And so Joseph moved to Missouri because Kirtland was just a mess. And then that's when he excommunicated Oliver Cowdery soon after that. And so then by 1838, you have what they call the Mormon War in Missouri. You've got the Hans Mill Massacre. You have the Battle of Crooked River. Those were kind of the two main big battles. And Governor Boggs issues the extermination order just a day or two before the Hans Mill Massacre occurred, which was, I believe, October 30th of 1838. And so quickly, just as quickly as Kirtland fell apart, Missouri fell apart. And so so then the Mormons were expelled from Missouri. Joseph was arrested, spent some time in Liberty Jail. Then he, quote unquote, escaped. Basically, the sheriff let him escape. have a very interesting interview with both Alex Baugh and Steve LeSueur. Steve wrote the book, I've got it right here, 1838 Mormon War in Missouri. It's a fantastic book on that period. So if you want to get the dates better than what I'm giving to you, that's a great book for that. And it focuses a lot more on the 1836 to 1838 time period. Of course, then the Mormons moved to, I don't know, there was kind of, there's a place before Commerce, which became Nauvoo, and
Quincy.
say that again? Quincy, there you go, thank you. Quincy, Illinois, and so the Quincy people kind of took in the Mormons for a time, and then they found Commerce, and it was basically a big swampland. So then they settled, and then Joseph renamed it Nauvoo, and so things went well there until basically the Nauvoo. Well, then the same things happens. Like the block voting keeps getting the Mormons in trouble. You know, the politicians in Illinois were all in favor of according the Mormon vote until they lost the Mormon vote, and the Mormons had a habit of switching between the Whigs and Democrats, and so then frustrating both parties, and they're like, we can't trust the Mormons, and then the polygamy things, and of course, then Joseph's presidential campaign in 1844, and of course he was killed on June 27th, June 30th, 1844. One of those two. So, how'd I do, Bill? You probably know that as well as better than I do.
Kind of a different question. Is there, in your experience, a universal belief that the temple will be built in Independence in the future?
Universal belief. I think there's a universal desire for that to happen. I believe when, so both the LDS and the RLDS churches held portions of the temple lot, and maybe to go into your chronology a little bit more, the first group back were the Hedrickites in 1853, I believe. Granville Hedrick from the Temple Lot Church was here's another weird thing. Just like Joseph Smith with being in Kirtland and not going to Missouri, Granville Hedrick said it's time to reclaim the Temple Lot, and this was 1853, which is before the Civil War. So his brother, I cannot remember his brother's name, was the one who actually purchased the land of the Temple Lot. They didn't do any block voting. They tried to gather in small numbers, but Granville Hedrick was the first one to purchase that. And so they have the ground where the original temple cornerstones were laid. But yeah, I believe the Temple Lot Church has approached both the community, well, I'm going to say RLDS Church because that's what it was known as at the time, the RLDS Church and the LDS Church, to try to rebuild that temple, and basically were rebuffed. I think the Temple Lot Church would still like to do that, and they'd like to get, because they're just kind of a small group, don't have a lot of money. I think I've even heard the Brazil group, a lot of those members are trying to kind of infiltrate the Temple Lot group and trying to take over the original Temple Lot. So to answer your question, I think there's a universal desire, but I don't think the LDS, RLDS, Temple Lot, Joint Conference of Restoration branches there's just too many disagreements as to what this temple would be. The Independence Temple and the Nauvoo Temple, the LDS and RLDS churches basically gave each other land so that the LDS church could build the Nauvoo Temple and the RLDS church could build the temple that's there in Independence. So that kind of made both temples possible. But it just, at current, there's not enough cooperation to get that done. I think members of every church would love for that to happen, but the leaders just can't make it. They can't get over their disagreements. I mean, why don't you tell us, Bill, what's the Strangite position on that? Is there a Strangite position on that?
Now, the Strangites probably have about 60 people. So we just sit back and judge the others.
But do you have a desire? Would that be a Strangite desire to be part of a, like, if we could all just get along and build a temple together, would that be something Strangites would be interested in?
Well, I would imagine. Is there kind of a belief that you've come across about more of a deliverer coming to a one mighty and strong type person doing some mighty work there in the future?
That's a very common belief among fundamentalists / polygamous Mormons. Everybody, I mean, if you know Lindsay Hansen Park, I love her saying, because she's just like, there are so many prophets who call themselves the one mighty and strong. And I'm starting to come across some of these prophets. It's pretty interesting. Historically in the LDS church, I would say, especially when I was growing up in the 70s, you would hear it a lot more than you do today. I think the LDS church, for example, they could easily turn that visitor center land into a temple if they wanted to. And when given the choice, they put a temple in Kansas City. I don't know. I don't know if it's for political reasons or why they don't do that, because clearly they have enough money. But yeah, the LDS church isn't interested really in cooperating, playing nice with all the other groups. I wish they would, though. I'd like to see all 24 there, but the problem is the Community of Christ Temple's in the way. So you have the same problem that Joseph Smith had, where there were previous landowners, and what are you going to do with those buildings? So.
Are you finished, Bill?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay, you can always come back. Monty, you go ahead, please.
I was thinking while you were talking about that that belief that frequently, you know, when I run out of deodorant, my wife tells me I'm mighty strong. That's as close as I ever get, though.
Anything
Paul?
else?
Paul, go ahead.
I think Earl Watt had his hand up and I would yield to him.
I don't see Earl.
Yeah, I don't see Earl either.
I think Earl's gone.
All right, well then, yeah, I do have a couple of comments. I appreciate Bill's request for chronology, and I'd like to add a couple of points in that. In 1833, when the Mormons were driven down to Jackson County, they went across the river into Clay County, and many of them worked very kind of low-wage jobs, but one of those was making bricks for the more wealthy landowners. The fact that they'd been driven out of Jackson County caused Joseph Smith in Kirtland to begin to organize the march to get Zion's camp together. And so here came a couple hundred Mormons from Illinois and farther north to converge in eastern Missouri. And I think it is interesting to note that the route that the early ones took and that these guys took too was fundamentally the route of Highway 24 across Missouri today. And so you can pick up quite a number of historical markers if you drive Highway 24. Anyway, it angles from basically the Quincy area on the Illinois side down to Independence. That Zion's camp group arrived in Independence and got cholera and basically fell apart. But it is interesting that it became sort of a feeding ground for later leaders in the church, because the people that had joined that military exercise were very often people that stayed with Joseph Smith and became later apostles, 70s, and so forth. The other chronology point I would add, Mike Riggs has done some interesting research that shows that the firms that the Mormons set up in Caldwell County and beyond, 1,000-acre farms that were set up so that people migrating out of the east who had no income could work on the farm and get an allotment from that, by which to then purchase their own property and settle in the Mormon community thereafter. Those firms were producing a great deal of wheat and corn and so forth. This area had been given to the Mormons in part because the non-Mormons had earlier seen it in the dry season in August and thought it was part of the Great American Desert. And so it was only fit for settlement by Indians and Mormons. And so that was one of the reasons that Missourians agreed to give Caldwell County to the Mormons, because they thought they would starve there. And then here they started pulling in these firms of 1,000 acres with Mormon employees making money, and they got the contract for grain at Fort Leavenworth. And that was a major contract. And then there was also a road to be built from Fort Leavenworth south, and the Mormons bid on that. I don't think they got that bid, but the fact that the Mormons were economically competitive with the Missourians was another major factor. Matter of fact, at Dawn, Missouri, which is just down Shoals Creek, about 15 miles from Haun's Mill, the owner of that mill was one of the militia that attacked Haun's Mill. So here's part of the economic duress. If they get rid of Haun's Mill, that meant more grist to be ground at his mill. Anyway, the idea that the Zion's Camp group of 1834 was a significant incursion of Mormons, 200 of them coming in, and then the fact that the economic issue was a significant one in 1838 is another point that I would add to that chronology.
Yeah, excellent, Paul. I don't know how I missed Zion's camp in there, but it was spur of the moment.
That's one of the joys of this forum. You get all kinds of strange questions that you're not quite prepared for.
Blair, did you have a question? I see you're unmuted.
No, I didn't have any questions, but I was very interested in this because I moved to Independence as a seventh grader going into the seventh grade in September of 1944, just for the election of Harry Truman. And I walked up that street past the Truman House every day going to school.
Did you go to Chrisman High School?
I went to Chrisman High School, where the Remnant Church headquarters is.
Exactly, yeah. When I was there in September, I was there with Steve Pineacre, and he asked somebody to pick us up, and he had a Crispin High School shirt on. I guess when he went there, it was a junior high, but like you said, it's now the headquarters for the Remnant Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So
No, it was
Uh,
a senior high, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. I went to the Palmer Junior High, which was just east of Truman House, for the 7th, 8th, and 9th grades.
yeah, it's funny. It's the only high school I could tell you in Missouri is Crispin High School, because when you go to the Remnant Church, it still says Crispin High School on it. So,
Yeah, I walked the halls of that building.
yeah.
Okay. Monty, did you have a question? Or
No, I
comment?
just want to let Rick know how much I appreciated his presentation tonight. I found it really fascinating. And I'm glad we get programs like this on here, because it's something that's actually something I can understand. That's saying a lot.
Well, thank you, Monty.
Okay, looks like Rick's got his hand up. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, thanks, the other Rick, for presenting tonight. It was fascinating. It was like you put up a picture and it's like, wow, I drove right by that today.
Oh, do you live in Independence?
And I live in Kansas City on the edge, but I had to go to, there's a place called the Book of Mormon Foundation on
Okay.
on White Oak.
Right.
You can almost see that fire station jail where the mules hang out for the tourists,
Right.
except for those $200,000 condos that they built in the way. But I was kind of fascinated by the pictures that you took and the placards that are all over the sidewalk. I didn't even know those were there.
I know they're hard to find, to be honest. I was so glad Matthew Turner, who I went with, he saw lots of pictures of him there, because he had done it before, and we still had problems finding some of them. We're like, well, it's got to be here somewhere.
But what you said, it was from the MMFF or something like that?
Yeah, so I picked up the pamphlet, which was kind of on the title page of the slides there, from the Temple Lot Church. They had a pamphlet there, and so I was like, I want to do this before we go.
Oh,
And so,
okay.
yeah, that's
So
where I got it.
So they had a step-by-step, like, here's this, like a scavenger hunt thing. You got to find this placard in this sidewalk.
Right. Yeah. And
Wow.
like I said, some of them you're like, it's got to be here somewhere, and it was really
Yeah.
hard to find some of them.
There was a picture you had. It was like a picket fence.
Right.
It was out on Walnut. There's a building that's fascinated me there for a long time. It was on Walnut, and it would be the southeast corner, like, of the square. There's an old building there with all kinds of
Oh, there it is.
things built into the building, like millstones, and a rifle is built into the building in the corner, and maybe a ball and chain. I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about.
So that's spot number 5.
Oh,
And
so that's a real spot.
Yeah, according to the map, that fence is on Spring Street and Lexington.
Spring and Lexington.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, then it must be a different building I'm thinking of.
What give me the address you had? I'm looking at the map right now.
It's on Walnut, not too far from Noland. You'd go west of Noland on Walnut, across the railroad tracks, and before the four-way stop. And it's kind of an old, like an antique collectible type place. It's been there for as long as I can remember, but
Yeah, the only thing I see on Walnut is on the south side of the Temple Lot Church. That was the first one was the hardest one to find. One of the harder ones to find.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the only one that's on Walnut Street. There's one on Kansas and oh, it's in between Liberty and Maine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't see anything else on Walnut.
Okay. Well, I thought that was kind of fascinating. Now when when I'm out and about, maybe you know, the Santa Calagon days, I'll see some more of those placards
Yeah, well,
in
you
the
know, the
sidewalk.
funniest thing is, I think now, kind of post-COVID, you need to pretty much make an appointment at the Temple lot. Me and Steve just stopped by and called the number, and he said, "Oh, I'll be there in 20 minutes." And so, but I know they have those pamphlets there, and you know, it's a fun walk. It's good exercise. So, oh, it looks like somebody is posting the link there in the chat.
Oh,
Um, oh wow, that's actually, yeah, that's a nice link. Yeah. Who was that?
David Joe
Oh
from
yeah, there you go.
Oklahoma. Thank you, David.
Yeah,
Sperry,
that second
Oklahoma.
link is there. Oh, actually, the first link is the actual. You can see the PDF that I used to make this presentation. So, thanks, David.
Somebody from Oklahoma knows more about independence than the locals do.
That's usually how it is, I think.
No, I just like, that's why I don't have a camera, because I sit here and I look for things while people can't see what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, check out the chat, and you can see some cool stuff there.
Okay, well, I'll yield. Thanks again for having a fun presentation to show us the things around that I just drive by and don't even notice.
If I lived there, I'd be the same way, I think.
Well, I was around when they were moving that Fornoy house. And I don't even know if I was related or involved with the Book of Mormon then. So it didn't really mean anything to me. Just, you know, quit closing the road just to move a house.
Right.
But there are two houses there at that location, about the same size, you know, little brick houses.
Right. Yeah, those other ones weren't. I don't know why they weren't on the walking tour, so that's why I didn't talk about them. But those are both Community of Christ houses as well.
Yeah, they're not too far from the stone church.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks again.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Paul, go ahead, please.
I'd like to go back to the Civil War issue and point out that in Kansas City, the Warnell House is one of the remarkable restored Civil War sites on Warnell Avenue, and it is across the street from where cannon are still set up to show where that battle took place. The Warnell House served as a hospital for both the North and the South during that battle. I mean, changing hands, of course. And then also Battle of Lexington, farther east along the river, would have preceded the independence battles. I just wanted to highlight that yeah, we've got a significant series of Civil War conflicts that come through the area. Rick, I'd like for you to go back to Governor Boggs, if you would please. You expressed a good deal of interest in him. Who do you think shot him?
Well, according to so he was in the area, had motive. Alex says he thinks that, you know, because Porter's response is, well, if I would have shot him, I would have killed him, because, you know, he was a very good shot. But he shot him with kind of a, I'm not a gun expert, but I understand it was like basically a BB pistol. So it looks more like it was just an intent to scare Governor Boggs than to actually kill him. And, you know, I mean, he got hit with some pelts and was wounded, but it doesn't appear that it was designed to kill. So I go with Porter Rockwell, but he got off. You know, we always complain that the Mormons always got the short end of the stick, but actually Porter Rockwell was not convicted. I don't think they could have convicted anybody. The court system just wasn't very good in Missouri. Very few Mormons got convicted. Very few Missourians got convicted of anything. So yeah, Porter Rockwell.
Floor remains open. Hey, and let me thank you, Rick. I appreciate the tour. Yeah, I've had a chance to work with Missouri Mormon Frontier Foundation and appreciate the effort that they've made to try to make sure that some of that history does get recorded. And it is,
Even if there's nothing to see.
you're looking at a fence, you're looking at a wall, you're looking at a hill. Rainbow Eagle has asked to present on the mound of rocks, the mound of stone that was on the temple lot prior to the Mormons coming. And First Nations people had a sacred site there that he is inclined to tell us about. But again, that's while today the Peace Plaza with the girl with a dove flying off her hand that is held by the it's on the northwest corner across the street from the auditorium. That Peace Plaza is maintained by the church and the United Nations Association of Greater Kansas City because of that close relationship between the two. But and the United Nations Association does just about annually, I think, meet there for a commemoration of peace. The people who have died in the previous year for as peacekeepers for the United Nations are commemorated, and then the bricks in that plaza are commemorating people who have made significant contributions to peace too. And so, yeah, I would call that to people's attention because while it is not a temple, it is the kind of place where we can have mutual agreement to meet and talk about peace together, because it is on the temple grounds and it is a site dedicated to the pursuit of peace.
Very good. By the way, and maybe I'll give you, I actually have another idea for a presentation, Paul. You don't need to put me on the calendar anytime soon, but I would love to refute the Spalding manuscript theory. That's going to take me a little time to put together, but I have some ideas that, so you just stick me in January or February. I'm not in a big hurry, but I think that would be good.
But yes, well, I'll be looking forward to that one. So that certainly gets quite a lot of attention.
Yeah, somebody on my YouTube channel just challenged me, and I'm like, okay, you just gave me incentive to shut you down. So.
All right, we've got hands up.
Okay, Monty and then James. Go ahead, Monty.
Well, mine really wasn't about the presentation. I was just going to say that I'm happy that Rena's been feeling better here in the last week or so, and I'm still praying for her. I'm looking forward to the day when the biggest pain she has is Paul.
I think
Okay, thank you for that comment, Monty. James, go ahead, please.
Just following up on your Mormon Disneyland comment, which I really liked. Does anybody, I mean, you gave yourself a walking tour with the brochure that you picked up. Do you know if anybody actually does walking tours of the Independence area, of all these historical sites, as well as, you know, all the existing churches and other interesting history? Because again, it's been a long time since I was in Independence, but my impression was that you have quite a bit of interesting historical, you know, sites of a variety of aspects: early Mormon history, current restoration history, Harry Truman, as I mentioned before, and Paul mentioned also Civil War sites and so forth. Do you know if anybody actually does walking tours of the walking area downtown Independence there?
I mean, that tour that I did, that I basically showed you guys, was self-guided. There is some Harry Truman, like, I don't know, there was, if you saw the horse and carriage in front of the fire station, there's some, but that's more Truman, it's not Mormon history related. So, you know, I mean, Liberty's not that far away. That Matthew Turner, he's such a good guy. Because he wanted to visit all the obscure cemeteries, and like, is it Hiram Page? Like, his grave is literally on the side of a dirt road. and Matthew's typing in GPS coordinates, and he's like, you know, Rick, it's fun to go with you because you actually enjoy this stuff. I drive my family crazy doing this stuff. And I remember at the time I was like, this is great. You're driving me around. But yeah, I shouldn't advertise, but yeah, Matthew's a great tour guide. So, but yeah,
speaking of Hiram,
there's nothing really formal as far as those kinds of things. I mean, you can go to like Latter-day Travel and spend a lot of money on their bus tours.
Oh,
but,
yeah, on a bus tour and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, two quick comments. One, a question: is Hiram Page not buried in the Whitmer family cemetery? I mean, isn't there a cemetery where both David and Oliver are buried, as well as a lot of the other Whitmers near Richmond, where they all live?
Maybe I'm getting the wrong person. Well, no, I'm going to have to look at my
Well, Hiram was
Amazon
an in-law
photos
of the
here.
Whitmers, so you'd think that he would
I
have been
thought it was
buried.
Hiram Page. I might be getting mixed up. I will tell you what else was funny was we were unrelated to this tour. After we did this tour, we did a tour of like just some cemeteries and things like that had a lot of places. And let's see if I can find it. We met a Polynesian fellow, and so we're like, you've got to be Mormon if you're hanging out in a weird graveside like this. And of course he was, and he was from New Zealand. He had a very strong New Zealand accent, and he was playing, was it rugby here in Missouri? And then we kept running into him at some of these other cemeteries because he was basically doing the same thing we were doing. Oh, come on. Oh, I don't see it. I know I took a picture of it. It was on a dirt road. I should show you some of my other pictures here from Whitmer that I didn't include in the presentation, but in fact, there's a picture of Robert Cook I see. Is this it? No. Darn it, the search feature's not very good on my, I typed in Missouri, but I'm not seeing the one on the side of the road.
While you're distracted with that, I'll just make another general comment. When I was living in New York City, where I've lived for most of my life, I now have moved to Salt Lake, but I spent all my adult life in New York City. And under the direction of Richard and Claudia Bushman, we had a group that was quite active for some time that studied early church history in New York City, of which there's a fair amount. And we actually put together a walking tour of downtown Manhattan sites that were relevant to early church history. You had, the site of Columbia College where Martin Harris went to see Professor Anthon. You had the site of the boarding house where Joseph Smith stayed when he visited New York City, and the site where the Brooklyn left from, and the ship Brooklyn, and so forth, where the early church newspapers were published in the 1840s and 1850s. And this was all within reasonable walking distance for a single tour. And so that's my inspiration for thinking that it sounds like maybe downtown Independence could support, you know, a walking tour of similar sort. If you just put together all these different interesting historical sites, maybe focused on early Mormon history, but, you know, throw in some Harry Truman and some Civil War and current restoration churches as besides. Seems to me like there'd be a very interesting tour but I'm sensitized to these things because I was so involved with this New York City early church history walking tour that we did for many years.
Yeah. I'm not finding that picture.
Let me respond to
Okay.
that. The Missouri Mormon Frontier Foundation, I believe, is still in existence.
Yeah.
It would be the appropriate contact, I think, to find someone to conduct that kind of a tour. Back when Ron Romig was involved, then clearly he would have been the person, but since he is no longer there, I don't know who the person would be to contact, but I would be confident that if you were to approach MMFF and ask for such a tour, it could be arranged.
Okay. Thank
Probably,
you.
I think I'd probably recommend the car tour instead, because you could cover the walking tour probably in an hour, but with the car, you'd want to spend the full day.
Right, because you could go up to Liberty and maybe how far is Richmond from Independence?
It's about 30 miles.
Okay, so you could swing around and see the David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery grave sites and things like that as well.
It's Caldwell County is north and east of Independence a little ways, but up you know, if you take Interstate 35 up to the Polo turnoff, 116, and take that over toward Bramer. Interesting story to me that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers proposed to build a dam on Shoal Creek near Bramer, Missouri. That dam would have flooded Hans Mill. So
Oh, wow.
in the 1960s, the news of that prospective inundation inspired the Price and Harlacher families to try to take some preemptory action to protect Hans Mill, and they actually did a lot of work trying to find where the well was. They then made contact with Carl Chapman of the state archaeologist in Missouri. He referred them to Bob Bray. Bob Bray went to the site and examined it shortly after the Prices and Harlachers had been there, after it had been plowed and disked and then rained on. So they picked up a whole bunch of artifacts. Bob Bray got to see their footprints and the artifacts that they'd missed, but they both identified locations where buildings had been. And so we have in the book that we have coming out with John Whitmer, we recount some of that story, that history. But the fact that the dam that they were wanting to put in would have covered a massive amount of excellent farmland, and the Interstate 35 was coming through at the tail end of it, making it another major obstacle. I think there just got to be, well, the Corps of Engineers have been building so many dams that proved to be counterproductive that this one got scrapped. And so in spite of the fact that they put together, I think, a 20-page proposal for protecting the Hans Mill, or moving it up onto the escape hill so that people could look out over the lake and see it and see where it had been. But nonetheless, interesting historical background before Mike Riggs and I got there with our dig.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, let me also throw out there that David Job has put in another link to the Missouri Mormon Frontier Foundation walking trail, and there's some audio clips there too. So thank you, David.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Okay. That was my comment and question.
Okay, anybody else got questions or comments?
It's amazing to me how much history we have under our feet that we don't recognize. And when you add the prehistory to that, and here I've been digging at Nauvoo to see that we have 10,000 years of human occupation on that swampland that the Mormons referred to as swampland, that their prehistoric predecessors thought was a pretty nice place to live. So I find it very curious that it had been occupied for 10,000 years before the Mormons got there. We had mammoth hunters there first. We had bison hunters for about 7,000 years. We had the first pottery in the Midwest showing up on that site. We then have early woodland and middle woodland burials on the same block that has the Smith family cemetery. And to appreciate that all of this prehistory underlies those beautiful lawns and the landscape of Nauvoo, but nobody pays attention to that because people go to Nauvoo to see the Mormon history. And yet, to appreciate that underneath our feet is this vast, we're only looking at a snapshot when we look at Mormon history, and we get very, very skewed views as we look at those snapshots. And so to appreciate how much gets lost and how little we see in the small few years that we get to live, it intrigues me. The more I dig, the more I'm astounded by how much there is yet to be found.
Well, I would mention, Paul, that a lot of the reason for that both, early mammals and Native American occupation of that site was that before the dam downstream was built, that was one of the few places where at the right time of year, you could actually ford the Mississippi, correct? So I think that, this is a possibility. I think that when the Heartland people get their museum built in Montrose with the ship Phoenicia in it, which is designed to attract Nauvoo tourists, they're, of course, make a big point of the fact that this is not just any old spot on the Mississippi River. This is a very special spot on the Mississippi River because it's a place where in pre-industrial times, one could ford the Mississippi. That may start to raise consciousness of the points that you just raised. And in fact, maybe we'll, I don't have deep connections, but Rick probably knows those people also. But we might suggest to them that that might be an aspect of their museum, is to point out all this prehistory to that particular highly unusual site on the Mississippi.
I really hope that they would do that because personally, I think that's far more valuable than attempting to associate that site with Zarahemla. Or there's the Jerry Grover presentation showing that you pretty well have to have earthquakes and volcanoes to produce the scenes of the Book of Mormon in Zarahemla was sufficiently convincing that the lawyer out in California, Mr. Ponce, who grew up in Iowa, decided that was the kind of presentation he would like to put before the judge.
Okay, well, but my point being that you can always have two objectives. You can achieve two purposes. So
I don't know that I would have any sway with them, but it's Heartland Month at the Gospel Tendance, I'll tell you that. So if you didn't see my ship, they were very kind. This is a replica of the Phoenicia ship. I just released my Philip Beale interview today, which I have to tell you, I was really impressed with Philip. He's pretty amazing.
Let me raise it because I think you said that he didn't get acquainted with the Book of Mormon until he got to Florida.
Right.
On that ship from the Mediterranean all the way to Florida.
Say that again?
Boyd Tuttle, the publisher of Digital Legends, publisher of many of the books about the Heartland theory, was on that ship as part of the crew from the Mediterranean all the way to Florida.
Well, and so Warren Aston was on one of those journeys too, and they didn't say anything. So it wasn't until he got to Florida, and then because originally he had a plan to he was going to sell the boat to England, and they were going to put it in a museum, and then COVID hit. They cut the boat apart, and then shipped half of it to England, and then the museum said, "Yeah, we don't. Nobody's coming. We don't want this anymore." And so that's when the
museum
Heartlanders
in
got
England?
in. Yeah, he lives in England.
But the museum in England didn't want it anymore.
Right.
Mhm.
And so so then the Heartlanders stepped in and said, "Hey, we'd like this." And that was when he started learning about Lehi and Nephi. And it was I had to chuckle. I guess you apparently watched it or listened to it today, Paul, is that right?
I just was working on the basis of two presentations that Boyd Tuttle has given us.
Oh, okay. So because I talked to Philip, and in the interview he said that he learned after the fact about two, he called them LDS prophets, Lehi and Nephi. I'm like, I've never heard of them called LDS before. So it kind of tells you how deep his knowledge is in the Book of Mormon. And I even asked him about the Jaredite submarine. And because I was like, "Have you heard about that story?" And he goes, "No." And I was like, "Well, let me tell you. Basically, two things tight like onto a dish. Like, is that possible?" And he's like, "Yeah. There was some guy that floated from France to Florida in a barrel." And I'm like, "Holy crap! It took like 2 months. I can't imagine. Like, how would you do that?" So he's very open to the Book of Mormon. I was shocked how open he was to it. So. And he even said in my presentation, I don't know where he got this from, but he thinks that Phoenicians came to America and shipped copper home for the King Solomon's temple. I was like, what? Wow. So.
Well, I understood that he was very much interested in the Phoenician contacts. That's why he invested in that Phoenicia. But
Right.
yeah, it's a remarkable story and interesting convergence nonetheless.
Yeah, yeah. Philip was super impressive. So I released that episode this morning. So you guys want to watch that? I was super impressed with him. Very, very nice guy.
That's neat. I'm impressed with the interesting collection that you pull together. It's a little bit like this forum. Fascinating how you get all these diverse viewpoints expressed and people having a chance to understand each other, perhaps hopefully better, and to read each other amicably at the same time.
Yeah.
Any other hands? Any other discussion, ladies and gentlemen?
I see one.
Oh.
Maybe in the middle.
Rena,
No.
you want to speak? She doesn't want to speak.
The building that I thought had some history because of its outside is at 106 East, East Walnut. It's Blue and Gray Bookstore. If anybody knows that location.
I'm going to see if I can pull it up on Google Maps.
I think, Rick, that used to be an antique store.
I found it, but I didn't find it. I found it on Yelp, the yellow pages. Blue and Gray doesn't even have a picture of their own front. The website Blue and Gray Bookstore doesn't have a picture of the front of their store.
Wow. Well, I remember driving by that years back, and I was under the impression it was simply an antique shop, but I'm willing to be wrong.
Yeah.
So this is really. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I just pulled up 106 East Walnut, and it stuck me on 263 South Lynn Street, which happens to be the location for the Church of Christ, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I don't know how the street view works there. So it's not even telling me the right building.
Yeah, I couldn't get Street View to work. So I just plunked around. I found the address from Blue and Gray website, put the address into Google search, and then went through all the realtor listings. And then I finally got to the yellow pages, and this a small picture of the front, but it's got like millstones built into the side. And there's a rifle that goes through one of the corners, and a iron ball, like a prisoner ball or maybe a cannonball, but maybe it's just made to look old. But anyway,
Well, it's really close to the Truman Courthouse, which I showed on my. It's like 2 blocks away. Yeah, and it's just down the street from the LDS Visitor Center.
yeah, if you have an email you're willing to share, I mean, if you want to say, oh yeah, that's nothing, that's okay. You know, that's just a whatever. I'll send you this picture that I found.
Yeah, gospeltangents@gmail.com. You can always use that one. I'm trying to see. I've got the picture. Yeah.
Okay.
Robert, see a message from Alice Norris indicating that she would like to get the contact for the Zoomathon for Haiti. And so I would appreciate if you would make sure that she gets that, since I am so clumsy about technology myself. And if anybody else is interested, let me highlight that we're halfway to our goal, and we'd like to be able to make sure we supply teachers and students with lunch for the next year. All right, any other questions, comments? If not, no. Good night, the Lord is watching o'er you. Good night, his blessings go before you. Good night, and we'll be praying for you. So good night, may God bless you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
Good night.
Okay.
All right, kids. We will see you next week.
Bill,
Robert. I'm going
Robert,
to.
you want Robert?
That's
Hey, first of all, Deb, I'm not sure what's going on with the recording. It doesn't seem to want to let me stop it.